The 11th Tale, The Tree and the Stone. The greatest tree in the deep dark wood. The deep dark wood is a dense green forest located in the northern part of the continent now known as the Summerlands. Though there are some beautiful crystal clear waterfalls and other sites of minor interest, travelers mainly flock to the deep dark wood on account of a great tree known as Old Father Oak. Princes and paupers alike have long visited this tree in the hope of gleaning some understanding from him, for Old Father Oak's great wisdom and benevolence have led men to consider him the world's elder, though no such title officially exists. A young tree's journey. There was nothing unusual about the tree that became known as Old Father Oak when his first green shoots emerged from the ground many centuries ago. The tree grew, as all trees grow, year on year, his branches reaching upward in search of sunlight and his roots thrusting downward in search of water. One day, when he was still but a young sapling, he was dug up by a group of humans and a large stone was placed beneath him just below his roots. And he was then replanted on top of the stone and the hole around him refilled with soil. And the humans recited an incantation and drew a rune and, when the ceremony was over, retreated from the forest. Now, the presence of the stone made life difficult for the young tree. No matter how hard he tried to stretch his roots, the stone meant that they simply could not reach any further into the ground. After several days of trying, the tree was about to give up, when all of a sudden, the stone started speaking to him. "Tell me, what can you see from up there? Pray tell me what you can see, for I am no ordinary rock. One day I shall be a magical stone, a great and very important one." The tree was very surprised to hear the stone talking to him so casually, and not a little vexed. "And why should I tell you anything? You do nothing but get in the way of my roots." The tree uttered these words much to his own surprise, for he had never been able to speak before. And so the stone began explaining a situation to the tree. It appeared that in order for the stone to become a magic stone, it had to be placed beneath the roots of a tree and enchanted in a special ceremony. And so, as the tree grew older and wiser, he would impart some of his wisdom onto the stone and allow the stone's own magical power to develop. The tree's ability to talk was simply one of the things he had learned as he had grown. And the stone had learned this from the tree. Armed with his newfound talent, the tree began talking to the birds and the fairies and the other forest creatures, and, upon hearing their tales of the outside world, developed an insatiable desire to travel, to leave the spot on which he was rooted, and so he began pulling at his roots until cracks appeared in the ground. He kept pulling day after day, unable to stop or be stopped, until eventually, the inevitable happened, and with a great creaking sound, the tree wrenched himself and his short roots out of the ground altogether. It was at this moment that the young tree discovered that he knew how to walk, and so resolved to leave the deep dark wood immediately and make for pastures anew. The stone felt very sad to see his only friend in the world preparing to leave, and said, "Promise that you will come back and see me sometime, won't you, young tree? I should like nothing more than to hear all about your travels." "Of course, I shall come back to see you, I promise." And so the tree set off on his journey. He felt sorry for the stone, who had now never become the magic stone he wanted to be, but he knew that he had to follow his own dreams. The young tree's journey allowed him to acquire great wisdom. Every time he encountered perils or monsters, he would simply stand stock still and pretend to be an ordinary tree. Should a predator come sniffing, the young tree would wait until it was very close before rustling his branches violently, giving the creature a terrible fright and sending it scuttling away in fear. The promise to the stone. The tree's journey continued through storms and blizzards into dank black caves and across deep blue oceans. On the way, he would sometimes meet other trees on journeys of their own. Most of the trees he encountered had also been chosen as locations for burying magical stones, and they too had left their stones behind and set out on their own adventures. He also encountered trees that were broken or withered, having become lost in the desert or trapped in great snowfalls. One day, several months into his journey, the young tree realized that it was becoming more and more difficult for him to move. No matter how much fresh water he drank, or how pleasant the sun felt upon his leaves, he was becoming slower and slower. "This must be what happened to all those dead trees I saw," the tree thought. "And that's what's going to happen to me." Suddenly, the tree remembered the promise he had made to the stone back in the deep dark wood. He promised to return to the stone and tell the stone all about his travels. The young tree had not visited the stone once since that day. Indeed, he'd completely forgotten about him. "I should go back," he thought. "I should return and speak to the stone while I still have strength enough to move." And so the tree set off home, back to the deep dark wood. The tree's short roots were dragging behind him all the way, trying to get him to stop, but the tree ignored them and eventually made his way back to the forest where he'd first sprouted from the ground. The sight of his old stone companion, however, gave him a real shock. Having failed to become magical, the stone had been mistaken for an ordinary rock, and most of him had been chipped off and carried away to make tools and other objects. Only a tiny piece of him remained. Undeterred, the young tree proceeded to recount all his travel stories, and the little stone listened to everyone in silent wonder. What happened next? When the tree had finished telling the stone the last of his tales, he thought to himself, "Now that I have fulfilled my promise to the stone, I shall not mind if I wither and die where I stand." Curiously, however, the tree noticed that he was feeling far healthier than he had for a long while. It turned out that much as the stone's ability to talk had come from the tree's ability to walk had come from being near the stone. And as he spent more and more time away from the stone, the tree had started to lose this power. He now understood that unfortunate dead trees he had seen on his travels had lost the power of movement on account of neglecting to visit their stone companions. The tiny stone and the tree, who was no longer very young, formed a firm alliance and became inseparable friends. Indeed, the tree placed the stone into a hollow in his trunk, allowing him to share all his knowledge and his wisdom. The two would occasionally go on journeys together, acquiring even greater experience and wisdom. For it turns out that while the stone had not become magical during the tree's long absence, he had become incredibly knowledgeable. As the years went by, the tree and the stone garnered great repute for their surpassing wisdom, becoming known as Old Father Oak and the Telling Stone respectively. Indeed, to this day, travelers still venture into the deep dark woods seeking advice from this most unlikely pairing of tree and stone. And so ends this branch of the story of Old Father Oak and the Telling Stone. And that, as they say, is that.